Hi, I'm Grace Stores. I'm the editor of the Move team, and I also run Movement on news portal. Today, I'm joined by John Saffrett, and we are hosting our second episode of the On the Move podcast. John, please can you introduce yourself for me and tell me a bit about how you came into the world of mobility?
I will. Thank you, Grace, and thank you for the invitation. So my name is John Saffrett. I'm the Deputy Global CEO of Ayvens. Ayvens is formed from the merger between ALD Automotive and LeasePlan last year, which has created the world's largest leasing and mobility provider. And we've got plans now to integrate the two businesses over the next 18 months and then be at the center of the mobility industry transformation going forward as well. How did I get into mobility? Well, it's a bit of a weird story. I actually graduated in computer science from university, so I'm probably one of the first digital mobility people out there. Back in the late 90s, I went to work for a company that was involved in vehicle finance, selling systems that helped dealers and brokers sell finance and insurance products. And gradually, I was then asked to see how we could enhance those products and use my technology skills to develop new platforms and new ways that we could sell those services. And I've kind of got stuck in mobility and stuck in digital since then as well. And we've been at the forefront here at Ayvens of launching a lot of new products and services that are leveraging our digital capabilities down the years. And clearly, with the acquisition of LeasePlan, we're now looking to do more of that as well. So exciting times ahead for us.
Yeah, amazing. So that's your two worlds colliding, really, which works out well for you. So last year we actually had ALD Automotive and LeasePlan come, and this year Ayvens, the new rebrand, is returning as a diamond sponsor. So we're really looking forward to having you there. I know you're taking part in your own talk, which is how can global mobility companies influence tech, sustainability and models, transformation of the mobility industry. Quite a mouthful, but you're also taking part in a panel as well, which is imagining the customer in the future. So today we're just going to have a chat about some of those topics, maybe having a conversation about leading up to those topics as well, and just a pre-event chat really.
Great.
So with Ayvens, obviously electrification has been at the forefront of has been very central in the mobility ecosystem for nearly 10 years now, I think. And recently, last year, there was the net zero emission goals were announced. And in the UK, the 2030 goal was pushed back for having no ICE cars. And I wanted to ask you, as a primary question, with the 2035 goal and it being obviously pushed back 5 years, do you think this is realistic? And what are your opinions on that?
Well, I think firstly, we've talked about the BEV transformation for a long time now, as you said, and it's really exploded in the last 3 or 4 years, driven by advances in technology, the arrival of new entrants, the launch of new models as well. I think the automotive industry and the mobility industry has shown historically its ability to transform rapidly when it needs to. And therefore, I think whether the deadline is 2030 or 2035, the industry will get there. Now, the challenge is how disruptive and how difficult the path to get there is going to be, and who's going to survive on that path, because there will be some casualties because of the demands of what's needed to be done as well. There's various forms of regulation and legislation that are coming together in a perfect storm, which is helping to drive the momentum. You've got demands now around ESG standards from regulators, from shareholders, from activist shareholders and hedge funds, driving the agenda, particularly for corporates, to transform and become cleaner and have a more positive contribution to the environment as well. And BEVs and the transition to BEVs from diesel and petrol is kind of central to that. For a large corporate, that's really visible. It's very measurable. And you can get there relatively quickly using the right expertise to say this driver's journey behavior and driving behavior is perfectly suited to BEV. This one you can do with a little bit of encouragement and training. And this one you kind of want to put into a long-range vehicle to get there as well. So the corporates are really driving the level of registrations we're seeing, and subsequently Ayvens is registering a higher portion of our cars as electrified vehicles compared to the market in general. I think the challenge now is that when governments move dates and they change regulation, it does disrupt the industry quite a lot. It disrupts it for the incumbents who are selling new cars, and it also disrupts the used car market, which is an essential part of the process. You know, the automotive industry and the mobility industry needs a well-functioning used car market in order for the new car market to be efficient. And therefore, that regulation now needs to be not written in stone, but it needs to be a pretty firm commitment so that all of the players and all of the incumbents can build their medium and long-term strategies around that. Otherwise, it introduces too much volatility into manufacturing schedules and financing schedules for everyone.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. I know that throughout Europe, there are different goals and different set dates for emissions goals and for reducing emissions. But I know in the UK, obviously, as we said, it is 2035 as it stands for no ICE cars. But as you know, next month there is an upcoming general election and the dates have been moving back and forth. There's been U-turns. Are you worried about, do you think supply chains and brands like yourself should be worried about the upcoming general election? Do you think it's vulnerable to moving again?
I think it more impacts the OEMs than people like ourselves, because the OEMs, you know, if you decide to build a BEV as an OEM, that's several years in the making in terms of the investment you make in a factory. And also on the other side, if you decide to ramp down your production of petrol and diesel vehicles, that's a multi-year plan in order to do that and transform the factory or mothball the factory or build new factories and invest in battery technologies. But a lot of the OEMs have built plans in the UK designed to hit the 2030 deadline, and they were all making statements about how they were going to hit those commitments, and then suddenly it moved by 5 years. I think a lot of the OEMs are probably looking and waiting to see what happens. Some of them have kept their 2030 commitments and said they're going to stay there. I think what the new government will need to do is be very clear very quickly, and that seems to be the indication we get of what the deadline will be, whether they retain 2035 or bring it in, and then people will adjust accordingly. As I said, we have to remember that, you know, for a finance company like ourselves and like numerous other companies out there, the new cars we're putting on the road today are normally on finance agreements that run for 4 or 5 years. So those cars come back to the used car market in 2029. And therefore those deadlines around ICE vehicles, and I know it only relates to new car production at the moment, but there's various city bans and urban mobility emission standards that come into force as well that do impact what the demand could be for those vehicles in 2028, 2029. And hence, that's why the whole industry just needs a real clarity around what the playing field looks like so we can all plan accordingly.
Yeah, and just going back to what you were saying about how some OEMs, you know, they're building new factories, new production lines, they're trying to rapidly keep up with these targets. What do you think are some of the problems that might come with rapidly the OEMs trying to keep up with these targets? And what are maybe some solutions? Because I know there's worries about range anxiety, not enough infrastructure for EVs to in time for this target. What do you think?
I think a lot of those. I think a lot of the infrastructure problems will be resolved. I'm not being naive, but I think in the UK, for example, in the investment going in there, I think people will come up with innovative solutions that enable us to meet that charging requirement. And I'm sure that they'll find a way of ensuring that the grid has the capacity as well to manage that. And there's a lot of innovation taking place around vehicle to grid, which is recognizing how the cars can feed back into the grid and support those demand peaks on the grid, and then use smart charging to charge the cars overnight when demand is low as well. So I think the industrials will come up with a solution on that. I think the challenge for everyone in the industry is range. The actual range you're getting out of an electric vehicle now is kind of settling down to a norm. Whereas 2 or 3 years ago, people were thinking, is the normal range going to be 300 kilometers or is it going to be 1,000 kilometers? 1,000 kilometers isn't going to be possible with the battery technology we have right now. So somewhere between 200 to 500 kilometer range seems to be the norm. And increasingly, the manufacturers are getting better at building right size cars with the right size battery to hit the market. Historically, it's been quite luxury, the BEV market. And it's only really in the last 18 months that we're seeing some mass production of the Fiesta equivalents and the Focus equivalents that have always been the largest selling cars in the UK. And there is a lot of that product coming in the next 2 years as well, if you look at a lot of the OEM roadmaps. And that's before you consider the impact of the Chinese OEMs and the type of product they're bringing to market as well. So I think everyone will get there. I think that the challenge we have now is that the corporate demand for battery electric vehicles is pretty embedded. And that's just going to carry on because they've got these commitments I talked about earlier. The first mover, the first adopters who were going to take a BEV have taken them. Okay, they've gone. They've all bought their Teslas, their BYDs, their Polestars. They've all gone early. You've now got this second wave of retail buyer that needs to be convinced that it's the right time to buy a BEV. And right now, I still think there's a lot of doubt in their mind about, if I buy that car today, is it going to be replaced by a cheaper model next year with a longer range? Or does it mean if I buy it today, the car's going to be worthless in 5 years' time because it's got 200-kilometer range and someone releases a model with a 600-kilometer range? So a lot of people have got to start making decisions now on what their next car is going to be, again, with the view of the new mandates coming in and the urban city bans. And if they're going to choose a BEV, there's still a little bit of a risk in that decision, as opposed to the last 40, 50 years, where on petrol and diesel, you kind of knew what you were getting. And you kind of knew what the used value of that vehicle was going to be. To be fair, it's where companies like ourselves come in and where some of the captive finance companies come in, because we offer financial products to that market, even on new BEVs or used BEVs, which allow entry into the BEV experience, but with a lot less risk. We offer a product that covers the price of the car today and the anticipated price of it in 3 or 4 years' time, and we carry the risk on the value of that car. We price in all the service, maintenance, repair, tires that people are concerned about, because it's quite difficult for a retail buyer to predict what an electric vehicle is going to cost to maintain at the moment, particularly on tires, where it's proving to be much more expensive than anticipated because of the tire wear. And we can also manage the charging infrastructure piece and the installation of chargers and the management of that charging experience to try to make it as simple as possible for people to access a BEV. We talk a lot in Ayvens about democratization of battery electric vehicles, and part of our ambition with our used car lease on battery electric vehicles is particularly aimed at that, because you have to offer the BEV at a price point which the market is used to. And right now, the price point of a BEV, either to buy it outright or on finance, is significantly higher than what people have been used to historically.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually going to come on to that because you mentioned, there is the first wave, which is the Tesla models, like you said, and we need the second waves, which are at retail price, so like a bit cheaper, because obviously electric vehicles are very expensive. I wanted to ask you a bit about customer loyalty in the growing EV market. So you mentioned, your BYDs, your Polestars, all of that. These companies, there's been a lot of companies reported in the news, particularly in China, that have been releasing cheaper EVs, and there's been some policies around tariff in Europe, UK, in USA, all over the world about tariffs, about prices for EVs. And I wanted to ask you about how you think customer loyalty how can companies maintain customer loyalty with the growing EV market? How do you think that they can move from having the traditional customer loyalty with their petrol cars? Do you think that can be maintained into the transition to BEVs?
I think it becomes challenging.
Yeah.
Typically when you had an ICE vehicle or a petrol or diesel vehicle, you could differentiate the experience of driving the vehicle. Mm-hmm. There was lots more characteristics to play with and engine structures to play with. A BEV driving experience is relatively generic. And some of the OEMs are going to shout at me for saying that. But because of the mechanics of a BEV, there's only so many ways you can differentiate the driving experience of being in a BEV. And it is a great driving experience. If you've driven a BEV, it's a wonderful experience to drive in. But it means that the brand characteristics and the brand differentiators for the OEMs have to change, because it's no longer about really driving the car, but it's about the experience of being in the car. And it's why a lot of the OEMs have been looking at, can they build that experience using the in-car entertainment systems and the seamless integration of an Apple or an Android experience. They're coming a lot of the time with bundled charging solutions. A lot of the OEMs are starting to look at models where they deal direct with the client at the point of sale, because they see an opportunity to build a moment with that client at that point and then build that loyalty. And then obviously the dealer networks are quite integral to maintaining that touch point over the life of the car. The BEV's very interesting because of the charging moment. The BEV offers more touch points with the car than ICE vehicles. And what I mean by that is when you go to a petrol station and you fill up with fuel, you don't need to do anything with your car. You know, there's nothing you need to activate. If you plug a car in, there's normally an app you use to activate the charging and set the charging speed and set the time you want to do. And in the new digital world that we're going to be talking about at the Move event, those touch points are like gold for a brand. They're like gold for a company. And therefore, a lot of the OEMs and a lot of the leasing companies and mobility companies like ourselves are trying to identify those moments and trying to identify how we can build brand loyalty by making those moments as brilliant as possible, you know, making them as seamless as possible and as easy as possible and as memorable as possible, and trying to create an Ayvens moment around that moment, or a BYD moment, or a Tesla moment around those moments. You know, a lot of people that bought Teslas, they love the Tesla driving experience, but they rave about the charging experience because it's just seamless and wonderful. And a lot of the Tesla loyalty is built around that seamlessness of the customer experience. And I think a lot of the OEMs are looking now at how they can do that because of the reduced differentiation around the actual driving experience that they can create.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there is. I do think experience is going to be, like you said, it is very key with trying to maintain the loyalty. How would you say that Ayvens is trying to maintain customer loyalty with this uptake in EV?
Well, we're quite lucky because leasing companies and mobility companies like ourselves have spent the last 40 or 50 years managing all those touch points. Mm-hmm. So when you take a product from Ayvens, it's normally a full leasing product with all services included. So it means we're involved when you're choosing the car, when you have the car delivered, when you need a service, when you need a tire, when you crash the car, when you want to take it abroad, when you want to return the car, when you want to choose your new car. So we've got those touch points. They're inherent in our product, and they're inherent in a full service leasing product, or a contract hire with maintenance product, as it's called in the UK. And therefore, we've built a lot of experience around how to handle those moments efficiently and how to make those moments really cool and really seamless. And we've also had a lot of experience of digitizing those moments already. So we've kind of got ahead of the game. And it's why a lot of OEMs partner with us actually in the UK and across Europe to offer that full service leasing experience to their clients, not only the traditional OEMs, but some of the new BEV OEMs we partner with in a number of countries as well, because they can leverage that capability, and we brand it for them as well. So if you take a car from us on our Polestar white label, or our Tesla white label, or our Ford white label, as a driver, when you call us, you have a Ford experience or a Tesla experience or a Smart experience, but leveraging all the Ayvens expertise that we've built in those moments over the last 40, 50 years. And because we've got those contact points and all that history of those contract points already, it means we've got a lot of data about how to make them better. We've got a lot of data and feedback from clients about the things they like and they don't like about those moments. And therefore, we can look at the customer journey and either move those touch points or improve those touch points, or look at ways of mitigating those touch points for the client. So They just have a better experience overall. So we're able to use all that knowledge and experience to support our partners, but obviously support our clients directly as well.
Yeah, great. I look forward to hearing more about that, especially on your panel and your talk as well at Move. I'm sure you'll dive a lot more deeply into the specifics of that, I'm sure. I just wanted to ask you quickly, just as a last point, about sustainability as a business model. I know we touched on it really briefly, but do you think what we've just been discussing do you think there are new models being driven, or do you think sustainability is going to remain at the forefront of a lot of business models in the next few years?
I think sustainability is the core driver because it's being driven rightly by regulation, which is helping to drive the change. If everyone was going to change, we would have done it already, and we haven't.
Yeah.
And therefore, sometimes governments need to act to create regulation which encourages people to change. And sometimes that regulation can be intrusive or strong, and sometimes it can be more subtle as well. And today, if you look at the UK market, there's a lot of corporate regulations around CO2 emissions and ESG commitments. There's government regulation focusing on the OEMs to make sure that the percentage of vehicles being registered on their fleet which are BEV are at a certain level. And then you've got the tax incentives, in fact, on the driver side, where they're being encouraged through salary sacrifice schemes to take a BEV with much more advantageous tax conditions that are in place. So I think the sustainability agenda is driving all of that regulatory framework, and I don't see that stopping. I think we've gone over the hill now on BEV and the necessity of accelerating the transition to BEV. Now it's a question of the various players and leading industry players developing our business models and developing our capabilities to support that transition, but also making sure that when the government set that regulation, they don't do anything which can threaten those players, or make their life more difficult, and therefore end up deterring the momentum of that transition as well. And that's where the governments sometimes have to tread quite a fine line with their regulations and balance it up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the next few months with new policies, even across the world, not just in the UK and Europe. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for that conversation. I look forward to hearing how those conversations develop at Move, at your talk and your panel. And I look forward to meeting Ayvens there I'll look out for them as they are Diamond sponsors, so they'll be right at the event. But yeah, I look forward to meeting you in person as well, John, and thank you so much for chatting with me today, and I'll make sure to be there at your panel and your talk.
Thanks a lot for your time, Grace, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks.